Yeah, good question. The question is, why is it that change programs fail? And to answer that, what I'd actually like to do is not talk about change programs, not talk about internal within an organisation change programs, but talk more about the outside world. So cast your mind back to the unravelling of the new millennium, okay, 10 years ago. Google was just starting out, 2 to 3 years in the making, startup company. Facebook had not been heard of yet. You had to fast forward a couple more years to be able to talk about Facebook, that 500 million user company that is out there today. And then fast forward just a little touch more and you've got Twitter. The world went mad for 140 characters or less. And of course, follow that up with the iPhone, the mobile web, and all the craziness around that. You know, people queuing up for days to get this new piece of technology. Here's the interesting point. Nobody sent out a PowerPoint presentation. Nobody sent an email. Nobody sent out courses. You know, sign up for the latest course, the latest training program on how to use any of this. And yet, my 74-year-old little German mum will say, Pam, can you Google this? 500 million people now. Think of the stats around that. I think, what are they? The 4th largest country in the world is Facebook, if it were a country, but it's not. It's a social network of 500 million users. 500 million people got on board. And again, nobody sent out a PowerPoint presentation that said, boy, you ought to get on board with this Facebook thing. And in fact, think about Google. Who would come up with the word Google inside an organisation? No, we would call it an information retrieval system or something very similar to that. Now, you know, just kind of hold that thought and now think about the craziness that surrounds someone like Lady Gaga and all those little monsters, as she calls them, that fan base that she is so passionate about, who get on board her music, who get behind it, and she's turned the music industry upside down. Well, those kids who get on board, who are following her, who, you know, turn out in the masses, those kids are the kids in your workplace today. They're the kids in your workforce. They're the kids who are leading change. They're the ones who are looking at you and saying, you want to do it that way? Oh, you're crazy. Why don't you do it this way? Those are the kids who are actually dragging some of the guys who are saying no, dragging some of those guys along and as standing out in front of change. Why do I mention Lady Gaga? Well, apart from the fact that she's reinvesting every dime back into her shows to increase, you know, fancy up her fan experience, which I think is something we can all learn from, at the same time, that word little monster reminds me of organisations today. We have employees, little monsters, as some of our organisations think, who are updating their Facebook status each day. And with that, organisations are putting up firewalls and they're trying to figure out ways to stop people from being able to get online and into something like Facebook. Therein lies a little bit of the problem. But hold that thought as well. Now I want you to consider this, the airline industry, and I know that just the mention of those words causes some kind of angst in a lot of people, particularly myself who travels a lot. But put that aside, the airline industry is a great case study in profitability, right? Or the lack of profitability. So few airlines, particularly in the US, have made money over the last couple of years. But what is really interesting is those who have. And of course we all know the story of Southwest Airlines, who happen to have made quite, you know, fairly good profit in up against a period of recession and the financial crisis and so on. Why is that something of importance? Well, every other industry, there are many players who have managed to be able to lower their prices, increase their service and their quality levels. Not so in the airline industry. In the airline industry, we continue to suffer increasing prices for the most part. And yes, the caveat is the discount airlines and reduced service levels. So for the most part in the airline industry, we're seeing the prices continue to raise, and with that, lower standards of service, lower standards of quality. There has to be a better way. So then I think of Southwest. What is the differentiator between Southwest and the rest of the airline industry? The way they treat their people. And the key word is the way they engage with their people. That is something to think about when you, now let's start to come back to that question of why change fails. A lot of the times we're apt to say our people are resistant. They're just digging in their heels and they're really not going for what it is that we want. That we've sent out the PowerPoint presentation, we've sent them an email, we've communicated well, and they're still digging their heels in and not coming on board. I would ask you to consider that the problem does not lie with your people. The problem actually lies with management and the way management is engaging. Forget change management programs, just think in terms of business in general, the way management is engaging with its people. So there are a lot of businesses out there that are embracing continuous improvement. And granted, last couple of years has been a little bit tough, but I don't believe that that was a problem with change management. What I do believe is that was a problem with, holy crap, I didn't see that coming. That's a little bit different. And granted, yes, the recovery, the speed with which you recover from that holy crap moment, that has a lot to do with change management. But now, back to the outside world. Are we really resistant to change, and is that the real issue in organisations today? I don't believe so. I believe that when you walk into an airport and you see all of those people, me included, checking ourselves in at a self-serve kiosk, we got on board with a change. And there was no PowerPoint presentation, no big communication hoo-ha that went out with it. I believe that when we use Google and when my little mum says, can you Google this? Again, we have gotten on board with what's going on in the rest of the world. The difference is we've drawn the conclusion that doing this, using this, changing our behaviour is good for us. We ought to do it. We've drawn the conclusion that we ought to do it. So again, that's something, a seed that I'd like you to have a think about. So why do I ask you to think about that? Well, because nobody managed our change. When we do these things on a Thursday night, when I sort my garbage and I sort my recyclables versus my waste versus my garbage, nobody managed that change but me. However, there were a few people, if not a lot, who inspired it. And now I'm going to upset a lot of people by saying, and I don't think it was the change management practitioners. I don't think it was the head of change management at the garbage recycling plant. I don't believe that it was the change management consultant. And I don't believe that it was any of the people who talk about change management in the traditional sense. And the reason I say that is because, now go to the stats, apparently most change programs fail. Which takes us all back to that question at the very start, thank you very much, long-winded way of leading up to starting to answer that question, why do change programs fail? Well, let's think about the first thing, and that is, why do we call it change management? Aren't we really talking about introducing something new and removing something old, one individual at a time? And sure, in organisations we like to label things Google, Information Retrieval System, change management. It's the same sort of principle. We're saying it's a change management process, and in so doing, I really do think we've taken the human condition out of this, and we've forgotten some really basic, fundamental things about the way we work. So let's talk about this change management process for a moment, what it really is. It presupposes, firstly, that the enlightened few know precisely what the many need to change. And then those enlightened few communicate that. They push that message out. Lots of different vehicles. They then hand it off to another few, the change management group, if you like, the champion and the change management team, who then manage the change process. Sound familiar? I mean, this is the steps of change, right? Those guys who are then managing that process do the work, if you like, to get people on board, to get ownership, to train them, to move them along and through the traditional change curve. And then they track it, they measure it, and you know, they really look at how well we're changing. Well, I think there's got to be something wrong with that process if, as the stats tell me, apparently 70% of change programs fail. So we're keeping that same process alive, and yet for the last couple of decades it truly has not worked for us. It has not worked for us. So you got to ask yourself, what's the problem? Is it the change process, or does the change, do we need to tweak that, or does the change process need to change? And I think it's a combination of both. I think that both have to change if you want to get different results. Isn't that what it's all about? Stop doing what isn't working. Start doing something different. And in this case, in today's business, I think it is a lot around experimenting with new ways of getting people to do different things, to do things differently. So, problem number one, we think that people are resistant to change. I'll say that again. We think people are resistant to change. You may think this semantics, but I'd like you to actually have a look at it from a slightly different angle, and I'd like you to think about yourself. And think about this simple thing. A lot of the times, we don't like to do something different, something new, because we don't like the people who are telling us that we should do that. We simply don't like the people, the idea, or potentially the way that we're being told. So to me, that's problem number one. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Problem number two, the problem with change starts way before you even start talking about the change management process. I truly believe that the problem with change starts with the way that we engage people. How come people will take to the streets for what they believe in, but they find it hard to get out of bed to take to the street that takes them to work? I truly believe that the issue with change management lies more with engagement than it does with change management. Engagement, the ability to trigger that state of mind that causes people to voluntarily bring their discretionary effort to work. And it's that state of mind that when you're in a change management process, you truly need to tap into. Mistake number two. Mistake number three is that we as the few believe it is the many who need to change. I'll say that again. We as the few, the leaders and managers in organizations today, believe that it is the many who need to change. I am the boss, you need to change. And potentially, not me. I recognize the change and I'm already doing the change. Mistake number three.